Hello. Okay, well, that's fine. Hello. Thank you all so much for coming, as Zach said. How many of y'all, this is your first time at one of these things? A couple, good. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about looking, the importance of seeing about gaze. Normally when film people talk about gaze, they mean the male gaze, the way that directors through the camera impose male ideas of desirability onto the subject, usually women. And that's important and worth talking about when it comes to the Fast and the Furious franchise. But tonight I want to talk to you about a sort of different kind of looking. Queer flirtation is substantively different from straight flirtation. With queer sexuality, there's a level of risk, of physical threat, inherent in face-to-face interactions with someone whose sexuality is unknown. Straight people are socially permitted to engage in flirtatious behavior in public spaces, and while a straight person approaching a stranger or acquaintance might be seen as uncouth, they will never be seen as deviant, assuming they don't act inappropriately. The same can't be said for queer people, especially for gay men. The risk of engaging in flirtatious activity with a straight homophobe is simply too great, and so much flirtation happens subtly, secretly, in ways that someone who isn't receptive to it might not notice. Robert Yang, a queer theorist and video game designer, writes in his essay The Tea Room on the difficulty of assessing risk while cruising in public bathrooms. The visitors to tea rooms, as they were called in the 60s and 70s, developed complex rituals of stance and eye contact to ensure mutual consent without stating anything explicitly. Explicit offers could be punished in a way that subtlety couldn't. In film, something similar happens. Queer content for studios, something similar happens because, well, you replace the threat of physical violence with the threat of economic hardship, with critical failure, but there is something similar there. Much queer sexuality in the history of film happens subtextually. Looks are always important. Much has been written about the homoeroticism of the Fast and the Furious franchise, but most of the analysis is lacking. It doesn't extend beyond the jokes on SNL about the fast and the bi-curious. You see, these are big men, and they're strong, and sometimes they hug, so probably they're gay, I think. If we look a little deeper, though, there is a rich seam of homoerotic subtext. The men of Fast and Furious watch each other, they gaze at each other, they regard each other with the same adoration that they look on their cars, their prized possessions. My favorite example of this is in Too Fast, Too Furious, the car scene, the staring scene. Brian O'Connor is attempting to woo Monica Fuentes, who's embedded with a drug lord. There's worries that she's gone native and they're relating to each other, the struggles of being undercover. He deploys a maneuver called the stare and drive, driving aggressively with his piercing blue eyes locked on the person in his passenger seat rather than the road ahead. It's very good. Roman Pierce notices this and he seems upset. He says Paul got this from him. So are we meant to believe that Roman explicitly instructed him? You can imagine a pretty comedic scene of Brian perched taking notes in the back seat while Roman gazes longingly at another person, another woman. But I don't think that's right. When Brian turns his gaze on a woman, Roman seems betrayed, as surely as he seemed betrayed about their criminal past. In Fast and Furious, the fourth movie, Brian and Dom's reunion is marred not only by Brian's past betrayal, but by Letty's death in the first few minutes. In Giselle's first appearance, she asks Dom to describe his perfect woman, and he lists qualifications that fit her not at all. Someone with piercing eyes who isn't afraid to get grease under their fingernails. This describes Letty well, but I think it describes Brian even better. At the climax of the film, Dom is given a perfect moment of catharsis as Letty's death is reenacted. The drug lord standing over the crashed car, a gun pointed at his head. Another film might have put Giselle in Brian's place, reenacting Letty's death, but it's Brian and it has to be Brian. It fits him even better. It gives Tom the chance to fully complete the act of forgiveness, to connect with Brian in that moment in the same way that he connected with his deceased ex-girlfriend. It's the culmination of his forgiveness made manifest. There are definitely heterosexual relationships in the Fast and the Furious franchise. Furious 6, which I'm very excited to watch, opens with Brian and Mia raising their son together. Fast 5 last week ends with Han and Giselle driving off into the sunset, not in any hurry to get to the future that they're ready to share with each other. But the thing is, each of these movies is tied together by the love that men have for each other. It's up to you to decide whether their love for each other is rooted in something erotic, but please watch how they watch each other. Paul Walker's eyes say more than his lips. Thank you all so much for coming.